Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in. And now we're going to resume where we left off yesterday in the book, The Footprints of the Jesuits, learning how the Jesuits overthrew Protestant Germany and reestablished the temporal power of the Pope in Germany. We're giving these examples to show how the Jesuits are operating in this country today. Remember, Germany was a Protestant country, and Catholics and Protestants lived together in harmony. Protestants marrying Catholics, Catholics marrying Protestants. Now, I don't advise that, and we alluded briefly at the beginning of this. Is it God's will for Protestants to have peace with the Church of Antichrist? So, I see God's hand here, as many would oppose, but the Jesuits want no harmony between Protestants and Catholics, was to restore Germany to Roman Catholic control, papal control, and I don't believe God wants Protestants to be mutual friends. I don't think righteousness should have any fellowship with unrighteousness. But nonetheless, Germany was living at peace. Protestants, Catholics together, both mutually regarding one another as quote-unquote Christians. And the Pope was put out to pasture, basically. The people ruled in Germany, and not the Pope. So the Pope sent in the Jesuits to uproot the peace and to place Roman Catholicism, the temporal power of the Pope, solidly back in Germany, and to make Roman Catholicism the state religion, and to persecute Protestants as heretics. Now, backing up a paragraph for continuity, beginning the last paragraph of page 127, if you're following along, he said, "Let it not be forgotten that Germany was indebted to Protestantism for her condition of peace and prosperity. We have seen that the demoralized condition of the Roman Catholic clergy was employed by Ignatius Loyola to justify the papal approval of his society, and the learned Jesuit historian Abbe Maynard is forced to admit that when Martin Luther gave the first impulse to the Protestant Reformation, quote, the clergy, that is the Roman Catholic clergy of Germany, offered a sad example of corruption, of corrupted faith and relaxed morals, unquote. He calls it a quote-unquote mournful period. Notwithstanding, for 1,000 years, these and other evils had been growing and spreading under the papal patronage, of Rome. The papacy then dictated the Christianity of Germany. Okay? Germany was Roman Catholic. And it said, mark the differences when Luther, Melanchthon, Bucer, and Karlstadt announced the necessity for reform and put the ball of the Protestant Reformation in motion. The great Ranke, whose impartiality has even extorted Jesuit praise when referring to the effect produced by the Protestant Reformation in Germany, says this, quote, in short, from west to east and from north to south, throughout all Germany, Protestantism had unquestionably the preponderance. The nobility were attached to it from the very first. The body of public functionaries, already in those days numerous and important, was trained up in the new doctrine, trained up in Protestantism. The common people would hear no more of certain articles such as, for instance, as purgatory, or of certain ceremonies such as the pilgrimages, and not a man durst come forward with holy relics. Okay, the doctrine of purgatory, certain ceremonies, pilgrimages, all these uniquely Roman Catholic things, and especially the worship of holy relics, was no longer thought of. in Germany as being Christian. Okay? So Protestantism had gone a long way to liberating the false doctrines, the false traditions of Roman Catholicism. Now it says, a Venetian ambassador calculates in the year 1558 that but a tenth part of the inhabitants of Germany still clung to the ancient religion or the ancient faith, unquote. All right? 1 in 10. Everybody else was Protestant. Only 1 in 10, a tenth part of the inhabitants of Germany still clung to the ancient faith. And before I even continue, isn't it funny? They still, even these people who understand God's hand in the Protestant Reformation, still acquiesce to Rome's demand that it is the ancient faith, that it is the first church of Jesus Christ, and everything else came after the Roman Catholic Church. When in fact the Protestant Reformation simply returned to the faith of Jesus Christ that existed before the Roman Catholic Church, and it is a grievous error to continue to regard the Roman Catholic Church as the ancient faith unless one understands its Babylonian roots. And in that case, it does precede the Protestant Reformation. It does precede the Church of Jesus Christ as we know it today, but not Christianity. Adam and Eve were Christians. They believed in the one who clothed them with skins, the one who would eventually come and sacrifice his own life, the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, right there in the Garden of Eden. God made sacrifice for Adam and Eve and clothed them with their skins. So the ancient faith, the truly ancient faith in this world is Christianity, Bible Christianity. That Christianity which came out of the apostolic period by Christ himself. Roman Catholicism is a latecomer, and Protestantism is simply a return to that quote-unquote ancient faith that began in the Garden of Eden. But historians still like to refer to Roman Catholicism as the ancient faith, and it's an error in my view to do this. But nonetheless, a Venetian ambassador calculates that in the year 1558, that but a tenth part of the inhabitants of Germany still clung to the Roman Catholic religion. The Protestant Reformation began officially in 1517. Okay, so we're talking 41 years. And Germany was 90% Protestant. Okay, this was the heart of the Protestant Reformation. It's where it had its greatest influence. And this is where the papacy suffered her gravest defeats, was in Germany. Now, Maynard, also a historian, also refers to this approvingly. In other words, he approves of this assessment that Germany was 90% Protestant, and it says, and the Jesuits make it a matter of boasting in order to support their claim to superior merit of having extirpated so much Protestant heresy and for bringing back such multitudes of people to papal obedience. So even the Jesuits consider it truthful that Germany was 90% Protestant, and it's the boast of the Jesuits that they turned 90% Protestant into a Roman Catholic country. That's the effect of the Jesuits in Germany. Now we might ask ourselves, what percentage of the population of this country are Protestant? Well, as like my friend Walt Stickle and I like to say in our research, that during the colonial period, barely less than 1%, 1 in 100 of the colonists were Catholic. They were an extreme minority. And now, in modern times, it has been said that Protestant or Roman Catholics make up as much as 24% of the population. But today, if you consider the effects of the ecumenical movement, Vatican Council II, and this supposed peace that is building between Protestants and the Roman Catholic Church, and assenting to Rome's authority over the Christian faith, then the numbers have reversed. There's barely but a few percentage points of true Protestants in this country. And Rome has the upper hand. Rome has turned this once unquestionably Protestant nation during the colonial period into a Roman Catholic nation today. And they've done it without a fight, without controversy. Now, Germany fought back. The United States has never fought. Okay, we've been led like sheep to the slaughter. Sheep to the Jesuit slaughter, simply because we're ignorant as a people. We are ignorant of this Jesuitical history. And we're showing this example of Germany as proof that Germany was the pattern by which the Jesuits conquered another Protestant nation, the United States of America. Germany was 90% Protestant, and Maynard also refers to this approvingly, and the Jesuits make it a matter of boasting in order to support their claim to superior merit for having extirpated so much Protestant heresy and for bringing back such multitudes of people to papal obedience. They brought all Germany, once Protestant, brought it all back to papal obedience. And that's exactly what they're doing in this country today. It's absolutely imperative for Americans to understand what role the Jesuit order plays in this country, what role they play in politics, what role they play in religion, and to understand how they have converted this country from Protestantism to Roman Catholicism. You cannot understand what the New World Order is until you understand what the Old World Order is, and then what role the Jesuits have been occupied since their founding to restore that Old World Order. Here's how they restored the Old World Order in Germany. Now, it said 9 Protestants to 1 Papist. That's what it was in Germany before the Jesuit-led Counter-Reformation. 9 Protestants to 1 Papist. Germany then was a Protestant nation, governed by Protestant authorities under Protestant laws, tolerant towards all who adhered to the quote-unquote ancient faith, that is, Roman Catholicism, allowing no interference from the freedom of religious opinions, happy, prosperous, and free under her own institutions. Sounds like America, doesn't it? In these respects, she was in the same condition as the United States is today, and so far as she could be in the absence of a written constitutional guarantees. So the only thing differing from Germany and America today is that they didn't have constitutional guarantees in Germany. We do here. And despite even those constitutional guarantees of religious liberty, the Jesuits have Catholicized this country. At this point, the question might ask, what nation can rival the Jesuits? What Protestant nation in the world? If the United States can't, and it's obvious and apparent to me now that it didn't, if the United States can't resist the Jesuits, what Protestant nation is there left on the earth that stands a chance? That's a question that my listeners can ponder, bringing more evidence to the fact that the New World Order is simply the reestablishment of the Old World Order, and the popes can thank the Jesuits. Now, back to Germany. The author, R.W. Thompson, says, What people upon earth, other than the German people themselves, had the right, under the law of nations or any other human law, to interfere with their condition, or to plot openly or secretly against their independence? What was all this, however, to the Pope or to the Jesuits? From whence did they derive the authority to form a conspiracy at Rome to invade Germany, overthrow her existing institutions, bind the limbs of her people with fetters they had already broken? Remember, it was Catholic, it became Protestant, and they instituted a conspiracy at Rome to overthrow Protestant Germany and make it Catholic again, to gather up the rusty iron they had cast away, the iron fist of Rome, and reforge it into manacles to hold them in obedience to an alien and foreign power. Who had the right to do that? You know, the papacy claims that right and says it's a divine right established by God. And also notice this author rightly acknowledges the papacy as an alien and foreign power to Germany, just as it is an alien and foreign power to the United States of America. It says, was this conspiracy commanded by the law of God? If it was, wherein is that law changed? If not changed, and God's laws are all immutable, may not the Jesuits of today enter into fresh conspiracies to subvert the present institutions of Germany or of Great Britain or of the United States or of any other nation that maintains the principles of Protestantism and freedom of conscience? R.W. Thompson's simply predicting right here that there's no nation that can challenge the Jesuits. Listen again what he says in reference to God's law. Remember, the Pope says it's his divine right to rule the world. Is that God's law? God says the earth is mine and the fullness thereof. Now, if God's law is not changed, and God's laws are all immutable, may not the Jesuits of today enter into fresh conspiracies to subvert the present institutions of Germany or of Great Britain or of the United States or of any other nation that maintains the principles of Protestantism and the freedom of conscience? If the Pope's claim to the divine right to rule the world, both in spiritual and temporal affairs, is the law of God, that's just what's going to happen. But if it's not God's law, if the Pope is not Christ or the representative of Christ, but Antichrist, isn't it up to the world to resist papal usurpation of the legitimate governments of the world, most especially the Protestant governments of the world? These questions command the most serious thought and are pregnant with considerations we're not allowed to put aside. Did you hear what R.W. Thompson just said? Are you concerned for the welfare and the future of the United States of America? First, understand that America is great because God is great, and Protestantism is a godly religion. And this government was formed under godly principles. Shall we give it all up and return to papal monarchy? He says these questions command the most serious thought and are pregnant with considerations we are not allowed to put aside. If we put them aside, don't we just put aside our Protestant faith? That's my question to my listeners. Now, before this volume closes, says R.W. Thompson's answer to all of them may be so plainly discovered as to enable the friends of free thought and popular government to see wherein their greatest danger lies. The Jesuits, says Ranke, conquered the Germans on their own soil, in their very own homes, and wrested from them a part of their native land, unquote. Will there be other conquests to be achieved by them so long as the freedom of conscience is sheltered and guaranteed by Protestant institutions? These Jesuits take advantage of Protestant liberties, freedom of conscience and freedom of religion to enslave us all, just as they enslaved Protestant Germany and just as they attempted to enslave Protestant England. And that's the next subject in our discussion in the book, The History of the Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. This is chapter 8. It's entitled The Jesuits in England. We've covered France, Portugal, Spain, Germany, and now England. The conspiracy to overthrow Protestant institutions of Germany furnished a precedent in dealing with other governments. That against England is characterized by some peculiarities owing to its having been a subject to the spiritual dominion of the Pope until the reign of Henry VIII, and afterwards under that of Mary. As there are no instances in history where a people have surrendered the control over their institutions without a struggle, unless previously reduced to absolute imbecility, the inauguration and progress of this conspiracy furnishes a great many object lessons of special interest to all in the United States of America who hold in kindly remembrance the struggles of our English ancestry for liberty. This is the most powerful opening paragraph. I could spend all the rest of the program talking about what he just said, but I will just focus on one comment that he made. No nation on the earth gives up her institutions voluntarily. No government of the world just gives up without a fight. Unless, of course, they are first reduced to imbecility. And I will just cut this short by saying the United States has never fought the Jesuits. Ever. Now, continuing. It says, when Henry VIII quarreled with the Pope, it was only about his divorce. Religion was not involved. He maintained the dogmas of the Roman Catholic Church until his death. We're talking about Henry VIII, the Roman Catholic King of England, and his feud with the Pope and how that set the stage for the rise of Protestantism in England, and we're going to talk about how the Jesuits overthrew it or attempted to overthrow it as instruction for how they operate in this country today. We've come up on the break. We'll come back right after the message. You're listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a left behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back to Inquisition Update. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com, and if you approve of Inquisition Update and would like to hear it to continue, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors Inquisition Update. And we thank Brother Nicholas for seeing the value of this history on Inquisition Update and supporting the program. Now, we're beginning our discussion about England and Jesuit machinations in England. As a preface, I want to state that we're opening our discussion about Henry VIII. Now, many people have heard about Henry VIII, but they don't know anything about him. He was a divine writer. He was Roman Catholic, devoutly Roman Catholic. He derived all of his power from the God of this world, who claimed the power to rule over the kings of the earth. That was the old world order, and Henry VIII was of the old world order, Roman Catholic. Did what the Pope said, until there came such a time as it was discovered that his wife, Catherine, could not bear him an heir to the throne, and that if England was going to stay in divine right hands, that Catherine should give him a male child. And she was obviously incapable, and so, being a divine writer, being a papal king, Henry VIII appealed to the Pope to annul his marriage so that he might marry his mistress, Anne Boleyn, and possibly through her to gain an heir to the throne, so that he might leave England in divine right hands, into Roman Catholic hands. Now, the Pope, for whatever reason, wouldn't dissolve the marriage. And it became a vicious feud between Henry VIII and the current Pope at that time. Now, the author says when Henry VIII quarreled with the Pope, it was only about his divorce. Religion was not involved. He maintained the dogmas of the Roman Catholic Church until his death. In other words, he was devout Roman Catholic. Henry VIII was not a Protestant. Now it says, but in order to give license to his passions, he was having an illicit affair with Anne Boleyn, he caused himself to be recognized by a submissive parliament as taking place of the Pope in religious affairs in England. Not, however, as the head of the national church, which did not distinctively exist as such until the subsequent reign of Edward VI. So, what we have here is a spat that has developed between Henry VIII and the Pope. The Pope won't grant him a divorce. He cannot legally marry Anne Boleyn. And so he just simply says, well, I'll be the Pope of England then. I'm not going to obey the Pope anymore. I'm going to do what I well please. And he rebelled against the papacy. Being Roman Catholic as he was, unquestionably Roman Catholic, everybody agrees that he was Roman Catholic, he was not Protestant. And he just simply had himself named, essentially, the Pope of England. Just cutting off the nose of the Pope of Rome. And you just don't do that in the Roman Catholic world, see. Now, as between him and the Pope, the dispute was about authority, not doctrine. They're not quarreling over Roman Catholic doctrine. Protestantism doesn't factor in at all here in this decision that Henry VIII made to just kick the Pope completely out of England. He said it excited intense anger in the minds of both, and this was soon imparted to their respective adherents. Okay, now England is divided. Those who are for the authority of the Pope over the king, and those who say we don't need the Pope, we'll just let Henry VIII be our Pope. Okay? Each, that is the Pope and Henry VIII, each was familiar with the methods of persecution and the implements of coercion long in use to produce uniformity of faith, and they were equally ready to employ them. Okay? They were both persecutors of quote-unquote heretics. That's Protestants. Make no mistake, this is a feud between two Roman Catholics, very powerful Roman Catholics. One, the God of this world, the Pope, and the other, the King of England. He says there were, however, differences between them worthy of being noted. The highest aspiration of Henry was to govern England. The Pope reached out after the spiritual government of the world. The Pope, without the sanction and authority of the Church, claimed personal infallibility. All right, this was before papal infallibility became a dogma. This Pope believed that he was divine and infallible, although it was not yet a tenet of the Roman Catholic faith. Now, Henry did not consider the Pope to be infallible. Now, it says they were consequently formidable antagonists, trained within the same circle of events, with minds disciplined by the same doctrinal teachings, and entirely agreed about the employment of compulsion, that is, force, in matters of faith. Each dealt with the other as a mere competitor for power. So it resulted in a power struggle in England between the papacy and the King of England, Henry VIII. Now it says the Pope, Paul III, endeavored to bring his royal antagonism to terms of excommunication. Okay? papal thunder. He was going to excommunicate Henry VIII, but Henry defied it and its accompanying anathemas. Okay? Wouldn't pay any attention to the Pope's thunders. Now, in proportion as the passions of the Pope became intensified by resistance to his spiritual authority, the measures designed to reduce England to obedience became more violent. Henry was denounced as a traitor to heaven and the church, and threatened with all the consequences implied by that denunciation. The Pope endeavored to induce Emperor Charles V and Francis I of France to invade England. Okay, here's the Pope essentially calling a holy Roman crusade against the crown of England. Henry VIII, he's going to use Emperor Charles V and Francis I. Both were devout Roman Catholics, and more than that, they were defenders of monarchism. Okay, we've already talked about both of these individuals in previous chapters. The Pope elicits the favor and the support and the military defense of Emperor Charles V and Francis I of France to invade England, make conquest of the country, and bring it again into obedience to him, that is the Pope. But these monarchs feared the consequences and prudently declined the undertaking. Okay? So the Pope's trying to incite two papal defenders, foreign countries, to invade England. That stuff still goes on today. Of course, it's all covered up by terms like the War on Terror and other things like that. But the Pope still calls crusades today. The armies move about at the Pope's will. Now, disappointed at this, the Pope hastened to solicit the aid of Ignatius Loyola, who without delay provided Jesuits to be sent to England as spies and to plot secretly against Henry. So here we have two foreign countries who have been solicited by the Pope to invade England and reduce England to papal servitude again, and overthrow Henry VIII and replace him with an obedient king, and they refuse to do it. So what does the Pope do? He recruits the Jesuits. What these two militias of the Pope couldn't accomplish, certainly the Jesuits can. I want you to understand what reliance the papacy places upon the Jesuits. Now it says these emissaries were privately instructed by Ignatius Loyola himself. And inasmuch as these instructions have been made known and are admitted by the Jesuits, they serve to show the uses to which Loyola intended to put his society. The philosophy of history is often left unperceived by omitting to observe the force of such evidence as this. Listen to what R.W. Thompson says. The philosophy of history is often left unperceived by omitting to observe the force of such evidence as this. In other words, you cannot understand history until you understand the role of the Jesuits. Now, after counseling them to practice great prudence and circumspection in conversing with others so as to unveil, quote, the depth of their sentiments, that is, to draw out their secret thoughts, Ignatius Loyola proceeded to instruct them that, quote, in order to conciliate to yourselves the goodwill of men in the desire of extending the kingdom of God, you will, quote, make yourselves all things to all men, unquote, after the example of the apostle in order to gain them to Jesus Christ. All right? So that's one of the defining characteristics of the Jesuits. They are to operate circumspectly, very, very cautiously, so as not to offend anyone. They are to be a friend to all. They are to be all things to all men, so that they may gain the world for the Pope. Now it says, and he tells them further that, quote, when the devil attacks a just man, he does not let him see his snares, unquote. Therefore, they must imitate him in order to entice men into Jesuit snares. Okay? They must use the devil's tactics. They must use the tools of Satan to entice men. Now, you might think this is just too big a giveaway to be the words of Ignatius Loyola, but that's exactly what he said. As a matter of fact, when we read the book Code Word Babylon by P.D. Stewart, did not P.D. Stewart tell us that in the Jesuit University of San Francisco University, that the most frequently invited guest speaker at that Jesuit institution was Anton LaVey, the leader of the Church of Satan in this country? I found that shocking when I first read it. But the Jesuits admit that they often have Anton LaVey of the Church of Satan lecture to them at this Jesuit university, so as to learn the tactics of Satan, that they might use Satan's arts for their benefit. You see, they don't mind using Satan's tactics as long as it's for their benefit. And they, here's Jesuit casuistry involved, when they simply say it's no sin to use Satan's tactics. Deceit, lying, and coercion, and these sorts of things, they justify using Satan's tactics because it's for the greater glory of God, ad majorem Dei gloriam. Now, literally, P.D. Stewart said they make a science out of studying the arts of Satan. And that's exactly what the Jesuits do. Now, it says, taken as a whole, these instructions were manifestly designed so to train all Jesuits as to make them, according to Niccolini, quote, crafty, insinuating, deceitful, unquote. Sounds like the dictionary definition of Jesuitism, which we covered earlier in the book, right? Crafty, insinuating, deceitful. These are the arts of Satan. The Jesuits are the practitioners of the weaponry of Satan. Now, Cretenow, a Jesuit, attempts to argue, it continues Niccolini, that they had reference to religion and not to political matters, and this is the only defense he offers for them. But this is in itself Jesuitical, inasmuch as these emissaries were sent to England upon a mission involving political religious affairs, that is, the policy established by the government of England in regard to the relations between it and the papacy. So using deceit, craftiness, insinuation, casuistry, all the arts of Satan, the Jesuits engaged themselves in religio-political operations, church operations, and political operations. Okay? Now, whether right or wrong, the English people established these relations for themselves, and they had the undoubted right to do so, and no alien or foreign power, whether employed by the Pope or any other monarch, could rightfully interfere with them. Okay, R.W. Thompson admits the English people were sovereign, and the papacy and the Jesuits had no business interfering in their internal affairs. But that's not the laws by which the Jesuits operate. Their jurisdiction is the whole world, and their realm of operations is in politics and religion, and no national sovereignty stands in their way. This is a warning to us here in the United States of America. We're to examine what the Jesuits did in France, Spain, Portugal, Germany, and now England, to gather up all of this insight so that we might clearly see how the Jesuits have insinuated themselves in this Protestant land, the United States of America. He says, these emissaries of Ignatius Loyola and the Pope visited Ireland and Scotland, but with the exception of intriguing with James V of Scotland, their mission was ineffectual, and they returned to Rome. At least history says it was ineffectual. I'd like to know what it was from God's point of view. Nonetheless, he says, Henry was not seriously disturbed by them. In other words, the Jesuits tried to influence England through the back door, through Ireland and Scotland. But it says no matter what the Jesuits did in Ireland and Scotland, Henry wasn't substantively disturbed by it. And it says, nor was there any other attempt to introduce the Jesuits into England until after the death of Queen Mary, whose persecution of the Protestants was sufficiently satisfactory to the papacy without their aid. Their introduction during her reign had been opposed and defeated by Cardinal Pole, an Englishman, but whether he was hostile to them or considered the existing system of persecution perfect enough without them is not clearly shown. Now, we are thus brought to a portion of English history specially interesting and instructive to all who hold in the admiration the civil institutions of the United States. For, excuse me, hang on a minute. Oh, why does that tickle in my throat always come at the most inopportune time? R.W. Thompson says, we are thus brought to a portion of English history specially interesting and instructive to all who hold in admiration the civil institutions of the United States. For they have read history to but little purpose who do not know how the events of that period gave stability to principles which now constitute fundamental parts of our national polity. Okay? In other words, you don't understand history until you understand what effect the history of England has here in the United States. You can't understand history, you can't understand current events, you can't understand the future, and you can't understand Bible prophecy until you understand what role the Jesuits have played in England and in the colonies and in the United States. He says, in tracing our pedigree back to its English source, it is as easy to see our intimate relations with the Elizabethan era as it is to follow the little rivulets in the valleys or upon the mountains in their course to the sea. In other words, our understanding of British history is imperative if we are to understand what's happened in this country. It says, on this account, some particularity of detail is rendered necessary, or else some matters of historic interest, not generally observed, may be omitted. During the reign of Elizabeth, the papal authorities renewed their exertions to put a stop to Protestantism in England, and sent more Jesuits there for that purpose. Quote, these satellites of the Pope, that is the Jesuits, says the historian, entered the country under fictitious names, and as stealthily as nocturnal robbers, mendacious in every word they uttered, and exciting the people to rebellion against the quote-unquote impious queen. So they entered England under disguise, under false and fictitious names. They infiltrated. See, they couldn't overthrow England by the military forces of Charles V and Philip II. They couldn't go in the back door through Ireland and Scotland, so they had to sneak into England proper, under disguise and by fictitious names. And it says the vigilance of Elizabeth, then Queen of England, however, was of such a character that she was not easily taken by surprise, and their plottings against her became less effective than they and the Pope had anticipated. Accordingly, other Jesuits were sent to Scotland to encourage Queen Mary and hold her steadfast in the Roman Catholic faith. But they were unsuccessful in the attempt to stir up rebellion there, and being careful of detection and arrest, escaped out of the country as fugitives from justice. Okay? they failed in their attempt, and the Jesuits had to flee. Have they ever had to flee from the United States? Not one time. It says, nevertheless, they accomplished one thing, which was to carry away with them several young English noblemen to be educated by the Jesuits in Flanders so as to fit them for treason against their own country, repeating in this the experiment Ignatius Loyola had made in Germany. So when all else fails, pick a few of the most prospective noblemen of the country, noble youths, young men, and spirit them out of the country and send them to Rome, or Flanders in this case, to a university, a Jesuit university. Teach them Jesuit casuistry, sophistry, deceit, and teach them Jesuitical principles of monarchism, and then send them back to the country to help overthrow the country. Take some of the most intelligent minds of the noblemen, young men, and convert them into conspirators against the country, and put them back in their own soil, give them an opportunity to go about spreading a rebellion. That's how the Jesuits operated. That's how they operated in Germany, and that's how they operated in England. I wonder if this applies to anybody in the United States, like, say, President Clinton. He was Jesuit trained, wasn't he? Sure was. Do you think he was a loyal American? Not in your life. He betrayed his nation. He was a papal servant, just as nearly every president since at least John F. Kennedy. He said all these movements, although not immediately followed by any direct consequences, tended to show how ready the Jesuits were to make secret or incendiary war, that is, war secretly or openly, upon anything or upon any country upon which the pontifical curse was resting. We'll continue tomorrow on Inquisition Update.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.